Feeling the need for change is at the heart of your ability to make it happen. Welcome to Turning Inward. I'm Vivian Carrasco, your teacher, mentor, midwife, and host of this amazing podcast. Together, we're going to navigate our interior lives. We're going to unearth our own personal truth, our insights, and our inner knowing. Change what you see in the world, how you make decisions, and the way you lead yourself and others. Welcome back to the Turning Inward podcast. Today I have for you, Candace Palmo, and she is a delightful soul. We're going to get into who Candace is and what Candace does in a bit, but I honestly could not hold myself back from inviting her onto the podcast and sharing her with you because she is a delightful storyteller and a wisdom holder. So, hi, Candace.
Hi.
I want to start with how we met because it was kind of odd. You and I talked about this yesterday. When I remember, you and I have worked on a project together where you've helped me edit some pieces that I've written over the years, like from 2014 to present. So we have been working together for several months now. And yesterday I was remembering how we met. One, I did not have the intention consciously that I was looking for an editor, but I saw a note that it was posted to a Facebook group that had your email address, and it just said you were available for editing. And there was something that I cannot name that literally was drawing me towards you. And so I reached out to you, and between then and now, we've had this beautiful experience together. So I wanted to sort of introduce how serendipitous this was. Mm-hmm. And you are a lover of language, so feel free to throw in your own word there, but thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. This will be fun. I'm delighted.
Yay. So I want to start with, there's a couple of things over the time that we've been working together. When you would say something that literally would make me stop in my tracks, I'd make a note of it. And so I have a couple of notes of those things in front of me. The first one I want to start with, if it's okay with you, is the idea that we're bound by our habit. You said at one point when we were working together that the roots, I think the story was around the roots of a plant, how they're happy enough, but they won't grow when they're bound by their habit. Can you tell me that story?
Yeah, I'm a gardener, and for many, many years, I spend a lot of time outside in nature, and I grow food and flowers, and I find that often when I'm there, it's a time where I can kind of pause in my day from my busy activity and just create a little bit of an open space as I'm working in the earth. And I find that I often see a lot of parallels just to my life reflected in the garden. And the story I shared with you, because we were talking about somewhere our subject was habit. And I remember one day, and I'd been gardening a while, but I had a plant in the ground that I was digging up because it just wasn't flourishing. It was hadn't grown very much since I'd put it in. And I thought, So I began to look at its outer circumstances that I should change. I should maybe give it more sun or less sun or, more shade or a warmer climate or something. So I dug it up and it looked pretty much like it had looked when I had put it in the ground. And a friend had stopped by and I was digging another hole. And I thought, I think these conditions will be much more favorable to the flourishing of this plant. And my friend looked at me and she says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm transplanting this bush." And she says, "Well, give that to me." And she had looked at the root ball because it was still, when you take these plants out of a container, often they're root bound and the roots conform to the size of the container going round and round. And she says, "Well, no wonder your plant isn't growing." And so she took her hands and just ripped into the root ball. And I went, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" She goes, "Well, no, you can't. This plant is bound by its habit and it really won't grow much beyond where it is right now. You really have to create a little chaos here. You have to break the patterns of the habit. And then the roots will have to find another way and then they will reach out into the earth and go deeper and access the nutrients that are down below the surface of the soil here. And then your plant will flourish. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's kind of true with our own minds as well. That the more we keep our mind kind of confined only to a habitual way of seeing the world, of doing things, then we too are not really going to flourish and reach our greatest potential. So I really see that, and I try to remember that when there's something is sort of shaking my comfort zone in my life or creating a little bit of unease as I ride an edge of something. And then I remember that that's kind of how growth happens, that you sometimes it's kind of the ripping into the root ball thing. And I've taken that with me always. It was a wonderful insight, just, coming out of the garden.
Thank you. And I adored that story. I adored it so much. There's a quote that I want to read. It's by Cynthia Ocelli. For a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. To someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like complete destruction. And that's how I imagine when you're telling that story, how your friend tore apart the roots. You're like, whoa, because...
Yeah, she was ruthless. And I'd never been taught that. I just would have carefully not wanted to disturb it at all, just put it in the ground and hope that it grew. So it was a huge, huge lesson. But I remember being quite shocked at what she did, and then shocked that I had never really learned that. And then I took that deeply, I think, into my life, and I found it to be true.
There's actually and I don't know the direct quote, I wasn't prepared, but it's coming to mind by Einstein that says, if you look at nature, something about its intelligence, and you'll have like this deeper knowing. I see the same kinds of things. I think that's why I adore all the stories that you tell me, because they're grounded, they're rooted in nature, and they have this undeniable truth to them. So thank you for that. I actually am feeling that chaos a little bit. I'm resisting it naturally, but I'm feeling it as I'm in this process of writing this book, and gulp as I just think about it. But you have also done this beautiful thing. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of the ecosystem of a literary industry. And initially when you and I met, I thought of you as an editor, and that word has tons of connotations, and I've come to learn. So I imagined you as commas and periods and, those sorts of things, but you are something completely different. Tell me how you describe yourself.
My background was not this. My background for 50 years was really in healthcare. I was a nurse, and my primary focus was really working in the field of transitions. So for many, many years, I was a midwife. So I helped with the process of life coming into the world. And then I was also a hospice nurse. So I helped as life was leaving this world. So I seem to have found really comfort in that transition zone of going from this place to this place. And so then when I really retired from healthcare, I had many other interests as well. And one of them was I do a little bit of writing myself, but I have loved language, and I began to study a lot more. And I thought, I really would like to help work with people to help them really give birth to their own projects, whether that be a book, whether that be a website, a blog posting. And so, but I do it differently than just an editor. I guess I would call myself more of a literary midwife, because it feels, that's my preference with when I work with people, is to work on a much more intimate level and much more relational, so that we work a little bit as a team to help somebody's voice become strong and clear, and to have them give birth to whatever it is that they are working on, whatever it is that they are offering to readers. So I had a website at one time, but I didn't maintain it because it wasn't necessarily bringing me work. It was, my work comes usually by word of mouth, but my website at the time was called Wordcraft Midwife, because it helped, I hope, convey that what I offer for some people is maybe more than just editorial skills. Yeah.
Yes, you definitely do. I can attest to that, undoubtedly. And you've sort of started to touch on one of the things, you're working together as a team, being relational. Those, before I contacted you, I had no idea of this. And it is, those are two of the those are the highest principles that I value, right? And so our values are aligned, and I had no idea when I reached out to you. But what I find beautiful is, that I work with the transitions of identity, becoming. Who are we becoming? And for me, it's sort of the leaving this identity, letting it go, where you are in the middle of that, and then transitioning into that new identity. So it is in itself a form of death and birth, but not in the physical nature, more of the inner life. So we have those two things in common.
Yeah. I find that, as a midwife, I used to care for just so I love the diversity of people in my mountain community. And just as you try to enter into the rhythm and dance of who somebody is as they're bringing life into the world, you find who they are and then you work with that. So I never had an idea that I ever wanted to impose upon people. And so it was an amazing time in my life when I was helping with birth. But also, as I do this work, and I'm not really sure how other editors work. I think, people who are commissioned by publishing companies and other things, they have their own styles. But I think I bring that midwife sensibility into my work. It just can't be helped. And I'm looking for somebody's voice and finding ways to strengthen and bring that out in a way that's very, very clear to their readers. And you and I have talked about this. Like, I'm a big reader myself. And so sometimes I read things and there's interesting information there, and I may find it fascinating and whatnot. But if I'm bumping up against sentences that are awkward, or the punctuation is all over the place, or I can't quite follow it, then I trip on it. And so I know when somebody's writing is really clear and good, then I don't take it in just on a cognitive level. I take it deeply. And my word I use for that is called, you kind of receive it almost as a transmission. And to me, that means that it comes in, it's not just a concept, it's a direct experience that I have of receiving something that somebody has written, or an idea that they have shared with me, or an amazing story that I take in. And so partly behind the work I do is that's what I'm really trying to help people do, to help them find that voice and then construct whatever it is that they're writing in a way that is so simple and clear that the message that they are trying to offer to their readers is received really deeply. So, that's also, I think, part of my motivation and the work that I do.
And that completely aligns. And I've appreciated that level of mentorship and instruction and prodding because I also, in a different level, right, believe that it is not information that I'm sharing with someone. It is an invitation to understanding something or remembering something that they already know. So I appreciate that. And that word transmission, it's also something that I have jotted down. When I start to write, I don't know if it's helpful or if I hear you in my head, but anyway, the intention is there. It's been beautiful. I've absolutely adored it. So you wrote a story that made me laugh about your snow peas.
I wrote a story about my broccoli.
You wrote a story about your broccoli, but you had an experience with your snow peas, I think.
I did have an experience with snow peas. I did. I'm not sure I wrote about that. But again, these are some of those lessons that I just kind of get when I'm in the garden. And the story was, I had an organic farm at one point. And so we were growing an abundance of produce because we sold at the farmer's market. It was an organic farm. And so I was picking peas early one morning and going down the row and feeling taking a lot of pride in how careful I was, to get every single pea picked. So I would start at the end and I would go all the way down very slowly, very methodically, picking all the peas. Well, by the time I got to the end, the sun had shifted in the sky, and then I turned around and thinking I had finished. And then I turned around and looked again, and it looked like I hadn't picked any peas off those vines. And I thought, well, how could that be? And then I realized that that's just kind of like what we do in life. We have an idea and an opinion, and we have one way that we do things, and then we do that. And then I thought, well, wow, you just a shift of perspective, another view, another opinion about it can help us see things so differently and see more. And so I don't know, these little insights just pop in sometimes as I'm doing something just ordinary. But I remember that. And I thought, that's why we need other opinions. That's why we need diversity. This is why we need to always take another look. This is why we need to not always make assumptions that our way is right and that we got it and we're done here, to stay open to another perspective. So then after that, I always shifted. I would go one direction, another direction, and take another look, and then another look back until I felt like I had really done all that I could do. So it was a teaching for me in that snow pea patch.
I love the snow pea story. I love it. And again, it aligns with what I tell my students when we're in a journey or in an experience together, is that life is their classroom and experience is their teacher. And I am in complete agreement that it is in the ordinary that we can see the extraordinary. And when we take in those experiences that we're having, that's when we have that. And I know you and I also talked about the word knowing, but when we come to that knowing that's deep in our bones. And you and I haven't had this conversation, but I grew up in, American education where that type of experience I didn't really even have until I was in my post-grad work, until I was working on my doctorate in the education sector for me. And it's different now. And I love teachers, and you guys do the best that you can. I know you do within that system. It's hard work, but our system teaches us to, raise our hand when we know the answer. And that's kind of the opposite, right? We have the experience to figure out the answer. That's why I loved your snow pea story, because it was that deeper truth, that sort of inner knowing that I think always knew, forgot as we were trained, and now I'm remembering again.
I remember living at a place where I was asked if I could go out and do something with the flower garden, which consisted of nothing but just daylilies that had gotten planted in a space and that had kind of taken over. And I think this was one of my really early lessons in that, about how all of us when we live within a certain confinement of view, and we label it, and we think we know what it is that's in front of us. And then we sort of narrow possibilities there. And I looked at these daylilies, and then I projected upon them all sorts of things that were not qualities. I thought they were pushy. I thought they just took over the garden. There was no bang for their buck. And on and on. And I thought, well, I'm getting them all out of here. I want to put in something that's going to be more beautiful and nicer, and that just won't take over the whole garden. So I dug them all up, and I took them out to some hinterland place where it was like a field, and kind of roughed up the earth and threw them down, and then left them alone, and then went back and created what I thought was going to be a really lovely garden with plants that I felt were perfect for that location. And then later I went and I went by where I had thrown all these daylilies. And of course they had taken root and they had spread everywhere and they were beautiful. And I thought, wow, okay. Now I had different adjectives to describe these daylilies. I thought they had chutzpah. I thought they had attitude. I loved their independence. And so what was different was my own view in my mind. I'm the one who imposed the limitations. And I thought this is true for all of us, really, when we're not in the right conditions in our life, the wrong career, the wrong job, maybe it's the wrong community, whatever it is. And then we aren't going to flourish. We may not be in the river of our life with ease there. And those daylilies did not want confinement, you know. So you give them the freedom to be all that they could be, and they did. And then I thought they were magnificent and beautiful. So again, I kind of filed that away of how we limit our possibilities, we limit our life when we do that, you know, that sometimes all anybody needs is just to be in different circumstances for their qualities to come forth, you know, to be recognized.
That is bringing up emotions in me because, and it's my hunch that the folks that are listening will resonate with that too, because that's a tough part of life, right? We are designed to try to fit in because our, you know, over thousands of years, according to scientists, we developed this tribal instinct because we were safer in a tribe than we were individual. But unfortunately, what that's created within us is this need to fit in and to feel scared about that chutzpah that you mentioned. But it's a lesson that I learned for myself very recently. And what I'm hoping for the listeners and for my granddaughters and for everyone I love is that lesson sort of takes root earlier because it makes our life so much better, is understanding the difference between what we're actually choosing. And when we're making choices, you know, are we keeping in mind who we want to become or where we will thrive? And I don't think that we do.
And the other lesson that I learned, or that I took in deeply then, was how often we will judge another. And which in some ways I was kind of judging the dailies, you know, labeling them all kinds of things. But when we do this to another human being, we can't know the circumstances of their life that puts them where they are. And we have not walked in their shoes. You know, we don't know those circumstances. So it was a reminder for me to not heap a judgment there on somebody who seems to be a little bit out of sync.
Right. And your opinion of the daylilies completely changed when they were in a different place.
Yeah, the daylilies did not change. They were daylilies.
Right.
What changed was how I viewed them.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So that was important to look at for me.
Yeah. Anthony DeMello says, I think he was quoting a parable of some sort, but he says the rain is the same, whether it's in the marshes or in the fields. You know, it's how we perceive the rain. You know, am I planning a picnic or am I wanting my garden to be watered? Right? The rain is the same.
The rain is the same. Yeah.
So tell us about the broccoli.
Oh, the broccoli. Yeah, I did write a story about it. I wrote it as a fable, but everything in the story was absolutely true. I remember getting just completely obsessed one year. I had a greenhouse and I thought, you know, I'm going to start all my broccoli plants from seed, not by starts, because I was going to plant a whole, maybe like 100 square feet of broccoli. And I got the very best seeds and I put them in the very best growing medium. And then I grew them into little seedlings and I took them out into the field and I amended the soil just perfectly with wonderful organic nutrients. And I planted them all in. And then I kind of hovered over them because I was pretty sure it was going to be about the best broccoli plants in the land. Then in the meantime, I planted the rest of the farm, but I was not so interested really in them because they seemed kind of ordinary, but this was really where I was putting my focus. And I would go out every day and I would just go up and down the rows and just, actually, I took quite a bit of pride that they were doing so well because of my expertise and because of everything that I had done and all my choices. And then pretty soon you could just see the weeds were taking over the rest of the farm. But I was like, don't bother me. I'm busy. I'm here with my broccoli. This is my broccoli. And just deal. I'll get to you when I have time. And then the broccoli started getting get yellow leaves and I'm chewing on my nails and worrying. And in the meantime, I could hear the carrots going, how about me? I'm strangling here. The weeds are, I said, no, wait, my broccoli is my broccoli. You know, like, how do we do this in life sometimes? We just get kind of fixated or we think something can't work if we don't give 100% to it. And then, oh, I don't know, I took a leaf into the nursery. What's wrong with my broccoli? Oh, then I put in different amendments and I'd chew, then I'd go pace and up and down and wring my hands. Until finally one day I went, wow. And I stood out there and I just sort of hollered at the broccoli one morning at dawn. I said, listen, I've done the best I can. I don't know what else to do. In the meantime, I got a whole field here of plants that need my attention. You just got to work it out. There's no more I can do. I wish you well. And left. And they did fine. I didn't need to hover over them. They just had their own journey. And almost every plant survived. But I think, wow, how often do we do this in our life? Like we think something can't happen if we don't have complete control over it, or we take credit for something that actually has its own natural way to grow or to do things, And then in the meantime, look at the price, there were consequences, with my neglect to the other areas of my life over the broccoli. It was crazy. And it made me laugh and laugh and laugh afterwards. I thought, wow, I kind of lost my mind there over the broccoli. But I learned from that. And I thought, well, we do this in our life sometimes. We just get obsessed. And then we neglect other things. And I learned so much about life when I had my farm. And I don't know if I've shared this with you at all, Vivi, but there's so many parallels that I found to my work as a midwife as well. So as a midwife, sometimes people say that as a midwife, you give prenatal care. And I used to think, no, actually, I'm not actually giving the prenatal care. It's the mother that's giving the prenatal care to her baby. And I'm the guardian around it to help reaffirm that everything that she's doing is working well as the baby's growing. And so even in gardening, and I felt strongly about this, that the further away we get from the source of things, the more out of touch we are. And so in the garden, I would practically weed with tweezers, like always with my hands, always in the dirt, splayed out, like very little had contact with the earth. There was not very much separation between me and the source from which all that food grew. And then I realized how different it is when you start to use hand tools, then you stand up, then you start to use longer tools, you get further and further away, and then you're in the tractor, and then there's some farms there, they farm by airplane, by dump, so, and now women who are pregnant, similar. People aren't even touching their bellies anymore. We used to always touch and feel and measure, and now that's considered archaic, that when you have an ultrasound, why would you need to do that when you just use this technology and then you could see into the womb, and it does not involve touch or closeness to that source. And so I watched, the world is changing, but I'm fortunate, I think, that I was able to help in the bringing of life into the world at the time that I did, because there wasn't all that technology, and I could keep very, very close to the source. And I felt that a lot with, even as big as our farm was, that it was all done by hand, because I felt like then and of course I was overly careful on my hands and knees with the broccoli, right? But yeah, I think there's a direct correlation between our understanding. The closer we are to it and the further back we are, the less we can understand.
I agree with you. There's a couple I just wanted to share that there's a technique. It's called forest bathing, I understand, as a healing technique to go into the forest and bathe in just I guess it's an energetic bathing. I've never really done it. I do recognize from my own experience that when I am in the grass barefoot, or when I am in nature or close to nature, it is one of the things that I absolutely have to integrate into my daily experience, that it resets me, kind of like when a computer's not working and you turn it off and then turn it back on. Mm-hmm. That's what nature does for me. And I had to learn that. I didn't know that was one of my tools. But when I think back about my childhood and how calloused my feet were from being barefoot running around, then it just had this reminder, this connection to that closeness that you mentioned. Yeah. We've had hours and hours and hours of conversation, so I'm trying to pull out the highlights, because you are a wealth of wisdom. You use a term I'd like for you to share with us when you talk about putting our oars in the boat.
Yes. I have had a teacher who used that example a lot when our lives can be so busy. I call it kind of ka-chung, 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 ka-chung. If you can like spiked like a broadband, and there's with very, very little space there. As we move through our world, our minds are busy, our lives are busy, and there's very little time for pause. And I've always felt that it's in the spaces in between all of the ka-chung, ka-chungs, as I call them, that's where the wisdom is. That's where I can find what's true. That's where insight is. And so how do we find opportunities during the day to kind of slow down the activity in our life or in our minds? And our teacher used to say it's like being in a rowboat in the middle of a lake, and your goal is to see the bottom of the lake. And you're just churning and churning and churning the oars and stirring all the silt up from the bottom, all the turbidity, and you're looking and you can't see because it's muddy, and you churning and churning and churning. And he said, it's really very simple. You just put the oars in the boat. Just let the oars go and just sit there. Don't try to make anything happen. Just sit there. And then after a while, all of it settles out again. Then you look over the edge of the boat and the water has now become clear again. Then you can see. And it's in those moments of pause where you have insight or an aha moment or some clarity. And it doesn't happen in the midst of the ka-chung, ka-chung activity in our life as much as it does in this space, those pauses. And I found that was always true for me if I would stop what I'm doing and go out into the garden, sometimes just sit, just stare, not trying to think something through, not trying to find an answer, or solve problems, but just let everything settle out and just be there. And then sometimes I would feel the shift or something would open. It was always in the open space or the pauses in my mind that I could touch into what I would call true. And that's where my intuition, I could gain access to my intuitive sense of things. It's where I could trust there what arose in that paused moment, in that moment of some stillness there. And I think for me, my life is much healthier when throughout the day, I do have times when I just pause, whether that be at work, wherever it may be. And I think you were talking about rebooting or resetting. Yeah, I think that's what happens when we do that. Even if it's just for a few moments. I try to do that when I'm waiting in line, not pull out my phone, waiting at a stoplight. Any opportunity where there is just a natural pause, then I try to just let my mind settle, just even in that moment. And that's a little bit of a reset button for me.
Mm-hmm. And for me, and you would coach me through this, because we were reviewing years and years of work, mm-hmm. 2014 to present, you would use that imagery and you would say, just put the oars in the boat, settle. Like, what was your intention here? Is this the right word? And so I just thank you. I'm going to use every opportunity to say thank you because it has been such a fascinating experience.
No, it's been a joy for me too. I love working in consort with another, in relationship with another. And that's kind of how I've worked my whole life, no matter what it is that I was doing. It was always very relational. Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the reasons why you and I working together in this way stands out so much, Candace, is because it doesn't often happen. That relational, that ease of back and forth doesn't always happen. So in a way, I am kind of getting closer to the ground to see the details here. And what I just realized in part of our earlier conversation is we have an alignment of values. And that I didn't recognize before we started this conversation. I knew that we had a common interest and that our experiences, even though they're completely different, like we see into things a certain way. So I could see how our perspective matched. But what I recognized just in our conversation today is that the core of it is probably, and I might change my mind, obviously, but the core of it is probably that we are aligned at our deepest values.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think so.
I have another really cool thing that you would say.
Oh, dear.
I know, right? I can imagine how nerve-wracking this is because I've been on the other end of the microphone, but it's just so beautiful. So you very often, several times, would talk about the difference between looking through a window or at a mirror. Say more about that.
Well, I had a teacher, as we shared the other day, that I did spend 15 years of my life living at a international Tibetan Buddhist retreat center as a volunteer. So I had a big chunk of my adult years was spent actually working really hard in many capacities at a retreat center. So our teacher there was a lot of what I learned from him at that time has so stayed with me. And one of them is that we can go about the world in two different kind of ways, really. We can look at the world as if we're looking out a window, which I think we mostly all do, trying to kind of arrange everything out there, get everybody in ship shape, change the conditions out there, and get it all lined up so that we will be okay. So every day so that's where our judgment comes. And if that person would just behave in this way, I could be good. If they would just simply move that piece of furniture over there, I would be good. Like all the time, it's an endless activity of trying to reorganize the whole world out that window so that we would be okay. And so if we ever came up to him and complaining about somebody not doing their work, and if they would just do their work, everything would go on better here. And, with any number of complaints, he would just get a little smile and he would raise his palm and just put his palm kind of in front of your face to reflect the mirror. And so it was less what was going on in the world that we were never going to fix ever and was beside the point, but that our work there was to really work on our own minds, not try to work everybody else's lives out for them. And so all he had to do was just gently hold his palm up, and then it would reflect back to me that, wow, here I am being impatient and judgmental and unkind and, on and on and on, jealous, irritated, all those things. But it would be just the most gentle way of showing me where my mind was, which is where my work, which is where our work lies, really, and trying to bring our minds to a place of more openness and more kindness and more compassion. And all of that is easy to do when we're surrounded by like-minded people. And then we can have kind of a false sense of who we were. Oh, I'm so kind, I'm so patient, I'm so loving, I'm so this and that. And then he used to maybe keep somebody working there that was maybe not always the easiest person to be around. I think he kind of did it just for that reason. Because then, oh my goodness, are we being patient and kind and gentle? No, absolutely not. So when put to the test, then you got an opportunity to really look closely at your own mind. It was just so gentle and so subtle. And so, sometimes I think when I'm looking at the world and I'm seeing it with a darker view or something, then I'm reminded that I may need to get out the Windex and clean that window. That what I'm looking at, it's my mind's projections out there. And sometimes you just have to kind of clean the lens a little bit. And then you'll see the brightness and the beauty and the qualities of the people around you, etc. So it's that kind of looking out a dirty window or looking at the mirror, back and forth, how you.
And broadening that, so often, I think, in general, folks will say, I need to leave this, whether it's a job or relationship or location or whatever, in order to get that, or I need something new or better or different. And what you are saying through that story and what I say or try to say in my teachings is that we're the better begins within.
Well, that's certainly one of the lessons that I am slowly starting to learn. Because the possibilities out there are kind of endless. If we haven't really worked on our own spirit, our own mind, then we're just going to bring those same conditions to wherever we go, really. If we haven't found that kind of peaceful, non-aggressive place within our own minds, then it's going to be hard for us to work for peace in a greater sense in the world. Kind of have to start first with ourselves.
Amen. And amen translates, or its derivative, it means I believe. I think it does. Mm-hmm. You can correct me because you're really good at that.
No, I do. I know. I'm a little rough sometimes. I hold your feet to the fire.
You are wonderful in that way. Oh, you are so wonderful. I cannot even, I'm grinning ear to ear. It was training, I will tell you. It was training. And I'm signing up for it again, I promise you. So... Oh, this has been such a delightful conversation, Candace. I am so excited to introduce you to my community. If they're interested in this kind of work with you, in the literary midwife, in expanding beyond, the commas and the periods, which I thought it was.
Well, though, I'm totally good with just the commas and the periods.
Oh, yeah.
Too. So it is a particular joy to work really intimately with somebody on a project that they... that's important to them. But I also love I call it the in-and-out burger work. It's just kind of quick turnovers.
The fast food.
So, well, it's a kind of a quick turnover, but I do have people who just want a second pair of eyes before they put that blog post up, before they put their website live, or just want to check in. I love that kind of that work as well as being a literary midwife. So.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. How can folks find you? How would they reach out to you and connect?
I would suggest that they just email me. Would be the easiest way, and it's my name, Candace Palmo, CANDACE, like pumpkin, ALM like mother, @gmail.com. That would be the easiest way to reach out to me, I think.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I looked up that quote by Albert Einstein that I referenced. It is, look deep into nature and then you will understand everything better. Thank you, wonderful. Candace, for helping me understand myself, my words, and making them better.
I love working with you. I've loved our relationship over these months as we sit together. And that's why I've loved using Google Docs for that reason, because you know how much fun it is when we're both on the document at the same time, reading it back and forth to each other. Well, there's usually the gold standard is kind of Microsoft Word, but it's different. And that's how I think the big time editors usually go to that program. But again, the using Google Docs, for me, supports that, my desire to have that be a relational working arrangement, So yeah, it's been lovely. It's been just wonderful.
Yeah, and I think I would say before I close that it is probably 5% the tool and 95% Candace. So.
Oh my.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining the Turning Inward podcast. Feel free to reach out to Candace at the email she mentioned. I'll also put her email in the show notes to this, whether you're finding it on my website at viviancarrasco.com or on any of the social media outlets. I so appreciate you listening and would love to hear your feedback. You can also email me with any curiosities or questions that you have at viviancarrasco.com. Much love. Thank you. If something needs to change and you don't quite know what it is yet, tune in and turn inward. I host an online learning community where we can figure it out together. It feels like a little family, and it's a place where you can be supported and offer support, because togetherness sparks change. Visit my digital home at viviancarrasco.com to learn more.